The cargo bay doors hissed open, and David Reed walked into Helios 7 with his backpack slung over one shoulder and a compact metal crate in his other hand. Behind him, trotting with complete confidence, came Scrapper. The honey badger's claws clicked against the metal floor as he surveyed the busy trade station with dark, intelligent eyes. Within seconds, everything stopped. A tall insectoid alien froze mid-stride, its compound eyes fixed on the small creature following the human. An avian merchant dropped the data pad she'd been holding. 3 reptilian dock workers burst into clicking laughter that echoed through the massive chamber. David sighed. He knew this reaction well. "Is that your security escort?" One of the reptilian workers called out, his translated voice dripping with amusement. "Did you bring it to scare away mice?" More laughter erupted from the crowd gathering around them. Scrapper, completely unbothered, sat down and began scratching behind his ear with a back leg. David made his way through the crowd toward the registration desk. A purple-skinned alien with 4 arms and a face like a squid examined him with obvious skepticism. "Species and cargo manifest," the alien said in a bored tone. "Human. Carrying medical supplies and processed metals. My companion is registered as Scrapper, species honey badger from Earth." The alien's tentacles twitched as it looked down at Scrapper. "That creature is permitted on this station?" "He's certified for space travel and has all his documentation," David replied, pulling up the files on his data pad. A shadow fell over them. David looked up to see a massive reptilian alien in military armor. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall with red scales and golden eyes that held nothing but contempt. "I am Rylak, security chief of Helios 7, the alien rumbled. "I heard a human brought a pet to a military station. I had to see this foolishness myself." David met his gaze steadily. "Scrapper isn't a pet. He's a companion animal." Raylak's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "A companion? A tiny scavenger? My people bond with crag beasts, creatures that can tear through steel plating. Warriors across the galaxy raise battlehounds that can track prey across 3 star systems." He leaned down, his massive head level with David's. "What can your little animal do besides eat scraps?" "More than you'd think," David said quietly. "Prove it." Raylak straightened up, crossing his arms. "Tomorrow, in the recreational arena, let your creature demonstrate its worth. Unless you're afraid." The crowd around them had grown larger. David could feel dozens of eyes on him. Some showed curiosity, but most showed mockery. This was the problem with being human in galactic space. Everyone assumed Earth was a soft world that produced soft species. "Fine," David agreed. "Tomorrow." Rylak nodded with satisfaction and walked away, his armored footsteps heavy and deliberate. The squid-faced administrator processed David's paperwork quickly, clearly wanting the spectacle to leave his desk. David collected his credentials and headed toward the habitation sector. Scrapper followed, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting smells. They passed through a marketplace where aliens from dozens of worlds bought and sold goods. An avian alien with brilliant blue feathers approached them. She wore expensive jewelry and carried herself with the confidence of a successful merchant. "I am Talara," she said, her voice musical through the translator. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Raylak." "Word travels fast," David muttered. "This is a small station despite its size," Talara replied. She looked down at Scrapper with genuine curiosity. "I've never seen an Earth creature before. Your world only joined galactic trade 3 years ago." "We're still new to all this," David admitted. "Tell me about this animal. Why do humans keep them?" David watched Scrapper, who was now investigating a crate of fruit with intense interest. "We don't really keep honey badgers. They're wild animals. Scrapper is special because I found him as a kid on a colony world. His mother was killed by mining equipment. So it's a rescue?" Talara seemed disappointed. "I thought perhaps your species bred them for a purpose." "Honey badgers don't need human breeding. They're perfect as they are." David smiled slightly. "They're survivors. Fierce, smart, and absolutely fearless." Talara looked skeptical. "That creature weighs what, 20 pounds? How fierce can it be?" Before David could answer, an alarm blared through the station. The marketplace erupted into chaos as aliens rushed in different directions. A mechanical voice spoke through the station's communication system. "Commander Voran to all personnel. We have an unauthorized vessel approaching the station. Security teams to level 3. This is not a drill." David grabbed his backpack and scooped up Scrapper, who growled in protest. Tilara's feathers ruffled with obvious fear. Pirates, she whispered. The Scorn Raiders have been hitting stations in this sector for months. Around them, aliens were closing their shops and fleeing toward the upper levels. David saw Raylak running past with a squad of security officers, all heavily armed. Come on, David said to Tilara. We need to get to a safe zone. They ran through the corridors, following the fleeing crowd. Behind them, David heard the distinctive sound of explosive decompression somewhere in the lower levels. The pirates were already breaching the hull. Scrapper squirmed in David's arms, wanting to be put down. The honey badger's instincts sensed danger, and every fiber of his being wanted to confront it rather than run from it. Not yet, buddy, David muttered. Not yet. But deep down, David knew that Scrapper wouldn't stay out of trouble for long. Honey badgers never did. 12 hours before the pirate attack, David had reluctantly agreed to meet Raylak at the recreational arena. The massive circular space occupied an entire section of Helios 7's middle deck, with reinforced viewing platforms surrounding a combat floor designed to contain even the most dangerous creatures. Raylak stood in the center with 3 other security officers, all from different species. Behind them, a series of reinforced pens held various creatures that David assumed were the warriors' prized companions. You actually came, Raylak said, sounding almost surprised. I thought you might reconsider once you realized what you were up against. David set down Scrapper's travel crate and opened it. The honey badger emerged, stretched thoroughly, and immediately began investigating the arena floor with his nose. I don't back down from challenges, David replied simply. A crowd had already gathered in the viewing stands. Word had spread through the station that the human was going to showcase his tiny companion. Most of the spectators were there for entertainment, expecting to see the human humiliated. Raylak gestured to his fellow officers. Let me introduce you to what real companion animals look like. The first officer, a being covered in thick gray fur, opened a pen. Out stepped a creature that resembled a wolf, but its body was covered in crystalline formations that caught the light like diamonds. The beast was easily 5 feet tall at the shoulder, with eyes that glowed pale blue. This is a frost reaper from the ice moon of Torvan, the officer explained proudly. It can survive temperatures of -200 degrees and track prey by sensing their body heat through solid ice. The crowd murmured with appreciation. The creature was genuinely impressive. The second officer, an insectoid similar to the administrator David had met, released a beetle-like creature the size of a small vehicle. Its carapace was deep black with segments that overlapped like armor plating. When it moved, the sound was like metal grinding against stone. A battle scarab from the desert world of Ket, the insectoid announced. Its shell can withstand plasma weapons, and its mandibles can crush through starship hull plating. More impressed sounds from the audience. David had to admit these were formidable creatures. The third officer released a feline animal that moved with liquid grace. It was sleek and midnight black, but when it turned its head, David saw that its claws were actual metal, likely a result of genetic modification or cybernetic enhancement. Shadowcat from Velros Prime, the officer stated. Telepathic hunter. It can read its prey's intentions and react before they even move. The 3 creatures stood together, an impressive display of strength, armor, and predatory intelligence. Raylak smiled with satisfaction. Now, he said, turning to David. Show us what your Earth creature can do. David looked down at Scrapper, who had found something interesting in a crack in the floor and was digging at it with single-minded focus. Scrapper, David called. The honey badger ignored him completely, still digging. Scrapper, come. The honey badger pulled something from the crack, examined it, found it uninteresting, and tossed it aside. Then he sat down and began grooming his face with his paws. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Raylak's expression showed pure contempt. Your creature doesn't even follow commands. What use is such an animal? He follows commands when he feels like it, David said, trying to keep his tone light. Honey badgers aren't pack animals. They don't have a hierarchy instinct. Then what good is it? Another officer asked. David picked up Scrapper, who allowed himself to be held, but continued to look unimpressed by the entire situation. Look, honey badgers aren't bred for combat or companionship. They're wild animals that happen to tolerate humans sometimes. So it's useless, Raylak concluded. I didn't say that. Raylak gestured to the arena. Then demonstrate. We've built an obstacle course. Let's see if your animal can at least complete a basic challenge. David saw the course they'd set up. It included walls to climb, tunnels to navigate, and targets to strike. It was designed for large, powerful creatures. He set Scrapper down at the starting point. The honey badger looked at the first obstacle, a wall with handholds. Instead of climbing it, Scrapper walked around it. When he found he couldn't go around, he started digging underneath it. "Stop him," Rowlac commanded. "He's supposed to go over it." But Scrapper had already created a substantial hole and was halfway underneath the obstacle. When he emerged on the other side, he completely ignored the next challenge and instead made a direct line toward the food storage area that the arena staff used. Within 30 seconds, Scrapper had torn through a supposedly secure container and was helping himself to protein rations meant for the battle scarab. The crowd was roaring with laughter now. Even some of Raylac's officers were struggling not to show amusement. David walked over and pulled Scrapper away from the food, though the honey badger managed to grab one more chunk and swallow it before allowing himself to be picked up. "This is pathetic," Rowlac declared. "Your creature has no discipline, no combat ability, and no purpose. It's simply a scavenger with an appetite." David felt his face flush with embarrassment, but he kept his voice steady. "He's not trained for performance. That's not what honey badgers do." "Then what do they do?" Tilara's voice came from the crowd. The avian merchant had appeared in the viewing stands. David looked down at Scrapper, who was now contentedly chewing on the stolen food. "They survive, no matter what. Survival isn't impressive when you're that small," Raylac said dismissively. "Any predator could end that creature in seconds." David wanted to argue, to explain that Scrapper had fought off predators twice his size, that honey badgers had skin so tough and loose that they could twist around inside it even when gripped by larger predators. He wanted to tell them about the honey badger's fearlessness, its refusal to back down from any threat regardless of size. But he knew they wouldn't believe him. Words meant nothing here. Only actions mattered. "I think we're done," David said quietly, putting Scrapper back in his crate. As he left the arena, the laughter followed him. His reputation on Helios 7 was now worse than when he'd arrived. That night, alone in his small quarters, David watched Scrapper eat his dinner with typical enthusiasm. The honey badger didn't care about reputation or respect. He just existed, fierce and independent and absolutely himself. "They'll understand someday," David told him. "When it matters." Scrapper looked up briefly, then went back to his food. Neither of them knew that someday would come much sooner than expected. The warning sirens had been blaring for 10 minutes when the entire station shuddered. David grabbed the wall of his quarters to steady himself as emergency lights flickered throughout the corridors. Scrapper jumped down from the bed, instantly alert and focused. "All personnel evacuate to upper levels," the mechanical voice repeated endlessly. "Security breach in Cargo Bay 7. All personnel evacuate to upper levels." David grabbed his emergency kit and opened the door. The hallway was chaos. Aliens of every species were running toward the emergency stairs, some carrying young ones, others dragging what possessions they could manage. He joined the flow of bodies, keeping Scrapper close to his legs. The honey badger moved through the crowd with surprising ease, his low profile allowing him to slip past larger beings who would have blocked David's path. They reached a junction where a security officer was directing traffic. The officer, a multi-limbed being David didn't recognize, was shouting orders in several languages at once. "Cargo levels are compromised. Everyone to residential safe rooms or the upper docking bays." "What's happening?" David asked. "Scorn raiders." They blasted through the lower hall with a boarding torpedo. "Security teams are engaging, but they brought heavy weapons and combat creatures." Another explosion, closer this time, sent tremors through the floor. Smoke began filtering through the ventilation system, carrying the acrid smell of burning metal and something else, something organic and wrong. David moved with the crowd toward the upper levels, but as they passed an observation window, he caught sight of the cargo bay below. What he saw made his blood run cold. The pirates were a mixed group, wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons from a dozen different worlds. They were ransacking cargo containers and threatening dock workers who hadn't evacuated in time. But that wasn't what stopped David's movement. In the center of the cargo bay stood something that belonged in nightmares. The creature stood on two powerful legs, its body covered in overlapping scales that looked like dark metal plates. It was easily 12 feet tall, with a tail thick as a tree trunk. and a head full of teeth that glinted in the emergency lighting. Its eyes were yellow and cold, tracking movement with predatory focus. "What is that thing?" someone in the crowd whispered. "Gorok," another voice answered, trembling. "Death World Predator. The Scorn Raiders use them for intimidation and elimination." As David watched, Raylak's security team arrived at the cargo bay entrance. The security chief himself was there, along with the officers David had met in the arena. They even had the battle scarab with them, its armored form advancing ahead of the security personnel. The Gorok turned its massive head toward them and released a sound that was part hiss, part roar. The battle scarab charged, its mandibles spread wide for an attack. The fight lasted less than 10 seconds. The Gorok moved with terrifying speed for something so large. It caught the battle scarab's charge, its clawed hands gripping the creature's carapace. For a moment, the two beasts strained against each other. Then the Gorok twisted, and the sound of the battle scarab's armor cracking was audible even through the observation window. The creature tossed the defeated battle scarab aside like a broken toy. Raylak's security team opened fire, but their weapons seemed to have little effect on the Gorok's armored hide. The creature charged, scattering the security personnel. 2 officers went down immediately, struck by that powerful tail. The crowd at the observation window backed away in horror. "Everyone keep moving," the security officer shouted. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" David let himself be pushed along with the crowd, but his mind was racing. That creature was down there with trapped civilians. The security team was clearly outmatched. They reached a stairwell and began climbing. David was about halfway up when he heard it. A sound that cut through all the chaos and noise, screaming, young voices high-pitched with terror. He stopped, causing aliens behind him to stumble and curse. "Keep moving, human," someone shouted. David pushed against the crowd, trying to get back down the stairs. Scrapper, sensing his intention, stayed right at his heels. "You're going the wrong way," an alien yelled at him. David made it back to the corridor and ran toward the sound. He passed several intersections, following the screams until he reached an access corridor that led to a secondary cargo area. The door was open. Inside, he could see them. A group of young aliens, maybe 6 or 7 of them, huddled behind cargo containers. They were children, probably left behind when their parents thought they'd evacuated to safety. Different species, different sizes, but all showing the universal expression of pure fear, because the Gorok had found them. The massive creature stood at the far entrance to the cargo area, blocking the only other exit. It moved slowly now, almost playfully, clearly enjoying the terror it was causing. Behind it, David could see 2 pirates setting up equipment, probably trying to cut through a vault door to access valuable cargo. The Gorok took another step toward the children. One of them, a small being covered in blue fur, screamed. David's hands clenched into fists. He had no weapons, no armor, nothing that could possibly stand against that monster. Every rational thought told him to run, to find security, to let the professionals handle this. But those were children, and the professionals had already failed. He looked down at Scrapper. The honey badger was staring at the Gorok with an expression David knew well. It was the same look Scrapper got when facing any threat, any challenge, any creature that needed to be dealt with. It was the look of absolute fearlessness. "We can't win this fight," David whispered to Scrapper. The honey badger glanced up at him briefly, then back at the Gorok. His meaning was clear. Winning or losing didn't matter. Those were children in danger, and some things you fought regardless of the odds. David took a deep breath and stepped into the cargo area. "Hey!" he shouted. The Gorok's head swiveled toward him, those yellow eyes locking onto this new target. The pirates looked up from their work, surprised. Scrapper walked ahead of David, placing himself between the human and the creature. The honey badger's body language was unmistakable. He was issuing a challenge. One of the pirates laughed. Did that human just bring a pet to fight a Gorok? The other pirate's expression changed to concern. "Wait, that's an earth creature. I've heard about their world. It's the size of my boot," the first pirate scoffed. The Gorok lowered its head, studying Scrapper with predatory interest. It had fought hundreds of creatures across dozens of worlds. It had never lost. Scrapper stood his ground, muscles tensing. The Gorok charged. The Gorok's charge shook the cargo bay floor. David's instinct screamed at him to grab Scrapper and run, but he knew it was too late for that. The creature was already committed to its attack, and running would only expose his back to those terrible claws. Scrapper didn't run either. He never did. As the Gorok's massive claw descended toward him, the honey badger did something that surprised even David. He moved forward, not back. He dove under the swinging claw and rolled, his compact body easily fitting beneath the creature's massive frame. The Gorok's claw struck the metal floor where Scrapper had been standing, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced plating. Before the creature could react, Scrapper was climbing. His claws found purchase in the scales along the Gorok's leg, and he scrambled upward with the determination of something that had never learned the meaning of retreat. The Gorok roared and twisted, trying to shake off this small attacker. Its tail whipped around, catching Scrapper and sending him flying across the cargo bay. David's heart stopped. Scrapper hit a cargo container with a thud that sounded fatal. The honey badger fell to the floor and didn't move. "Scrapper!" David started to run forward. Then Scrapper stood up. The honey badger shook his head once as if annoyed by the inconvenience of being thrown 20 feet into a metal wall. He looked at the Gorok, and if anything, he seemed more determined than before. "That's impossible," one of the pirates whispered. "That impact should have killed it." David could have told them about honey badgers if they'd cared to listen. He could have explained about their thick, loose skin that distributed impact and prevented killing bites. He could have described their flexible spines and sturdy bone structure. He could have mentioned that honey badgers routinely survived encounters with lions, hyenas, and pythons on Earth, but there was no time for explanations. Scrapper charged again, and this time David saw the honey badger's true strategy. Scrapper wasn't trying to overpower the Gorok. He was too smart for that. Instead, he was going for vulnerable points. The Gorok swiped at Scrapper, but the honey badger ducked under the blow and latched onto the creature's front leg, his teeth finding the gap between armored scales. The Gorok howled and tried to bite Scrapper, but the honey badger's loose skin meant the creature couldn't get a proper grip. When the Gorok's jaws closed on Scrapper, the honey badger simply twisted within his own skin and bit the Gorok's mouth from the inside. Blood, dark and thick, dripped from the Gorok's jaws as it released Scrapper and stumbled back. David's mind flashed to the day he'd found Scrapper. It had been on a mining colony at the edge of human space. David had been checking cargo manifest when he heard sounds from behind a storage unit. He'd found a honey badger kit, barely weaned, standing over a dead mining drone that had tried to grab it. Even then, Scrapper hadn't shown fear. Even as a baby, the honey badger's first instinct had been to fight rather than flee. David had researched honey badgers after taking Scrapper in. He'd learned about their reputation on Earth as possibly the most fearless animal on the planet. He'd watched videos of honey badgers fighting off entire packs of wild dogs, taking on leopards, raiding beehives despite thousands of stings, and simply refusing to die no matter what nature threw at them. He'd learned that honey badgers had loose, tough skin up to a quarter-inch thick that protected them from bites, stings, and even porcupine quills. He'd discovered that they could emit a stink similar to skunks when threatened, though Scrapper had never needed to use that defense. Most importantly, he'd learned that honey badgers simply did not stop. They fought until they won, or until they physically couldn't continue. There was no middle ground, no surrender, no retreat. The Gorok was learning this lesson the hard way. The creature tried to use its tail again, sweeping it low to crush Scrapper. The honey badger jumped, letting the tail pass beneath him and landed on top of it. Before the Gorok could react, Scrapper was running up the length of the tail, his claws digging in for traction. The Gorok spun, trying to throw Scrapper off, but the honey badger had reached the creature's back now. He bit down on the base of the Gorok's neck, where the scales were smaller and less protective. The Gorok slammed its back against a cargo container, crushing Scrapper between its armored body and the metal wall. The impact echoed through the bay. Scrapper held on. The Gorok did it again, harder this time. Scrapper's grip tightened. David watched in awe and horror as his companion demonstrated what millions of years of evolution on a harsh planet had created. Honey badgers didn't evolve to be the biggest or the strongest. They evolved to be unbreakable. The two pirates had stopped their work entirely, staring at the fight with expressions of disbelief. "What is that thing?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. "It's from Earth," the other replied. "Death world in the Sol system." Earth isn't listed as a death world in any database. Maybe it should be. The Gorok was bleeding now from multiple wounds. None of them were immediately fatal, but together they were taking their toll. The creature was slowing down, its movements becoming less coordinated. Scrapper, despite taking impacts that should have killed him several times over, was still fighting with the same intensity he'd shown at the start. The children behind the cargo containers watched in stunned silence. They'd stopped crying, too fascinated by what they were seeing to remember their fear. David knew he should help somehow, but he also knew that interfering might distract Scrapper at a critical moment. The honey badger was in his element now, doing what nature had designed him to do, and the best thing David could do was trust him. The Gorak made one final attempt to end the fight. It reared up on its hind legs and threw itself backward, intending to crush Scrapper completely under its massive weight. At the last second, Scrapper released his grip and scrambled to the side. The Gorak crashed onto its back with earth-shaking force, and in that moment of vulnerability, Scrapper saw his opportunity. The Gorak's throat was exposed. Scrapper didn't hesitate. While the Gorak thrashed on its back, trying to right itself, the honey badger launched himself at the exposed throat. His teeth found the softer scales beneath the armored jaw. These scales were meant to flex, to allow the Gorak to move its head, which made them thinner than the armor elsewhere on its body. For most predators, this weakness didn't matter, because few creatures could get close enough to exploit it. Scrapper wasn't most predators. The Gorak's roar turned into a gurgling scream. It rolled over, crushing Scrapper beneath its weight, but the honey badger's jaws remained locked. The loose skin that protected Scrapper meant the Gorak's weight was distributed across his body, rather than focused on crushing vital organs. David started forward, unable to watch without acting, but one of the pirates grabbed his arm. "Don't," the pirate said, his voice filled with something like respect. "You'll only get in its way." The Gorak managed to get to its feet, blood now flowing freely from its throat. It staggered toward a wall, clearly intending to scrape Scrapper off against the metal surface. Scrapper released his grip just before impact and dropped to the floor. The Gorak turned, slower now, its yellow eyes showing something they'd never shown before in countless battles across the galaxy: fear. The creature tried to retreat, but Scrapper pursued. The honey badger moved with purpose, climbing up a cargo container to gain height, then launching himself at the Gorak's head. This time, Scrapper aimed for the eyes. His claws raked across the creature's face, finding the vulnerable orbs and tearing with precision. The Gorak screamed and shook its head violently, but Scrapper hung on, his compact body swinging like a pendulum as the creature thrashed. Blood splattered across the cargo bay floor. The Gorak crashed into containers, trying desperately to dislodge its attacker. Equipment scattered. Metal groaned under the impact of the creature's increasingly frantic movements. David realized with horror that he couldn't tell how much of the blood was from the Gorak and how much was from Scrapper. The honey badger had to be injured. No creature could take this much punishment without serious damage, but Scrapper kept fighting. The Gorak's movements were becoming erratic now. It had lost too much blood from the throat wound. Its vision was compromised. The creature that had defeated Raylax's battle scarab in seconds was now stumbling, disoriented, dying. Scrapper dropped from the Gorak's head and circled to its side. The creature tried to track him but moved too slowly. The honey badger darted in and tore at the same throat wound he'd opened earlier, widening it, deepening it, refusing to give the Gorak any chance to recover. The creature's front legs gave out. It crashed to its knees, still trying to fight, still trying to use its claws to defend itself. But its strength was fading fast. Scrapper backed away slightly, watching the Gorak with cold calculation. The honey badger was breathing heavily, his white stripe now stained dark with blood, but his eyes remained focused and alert. The Gorak made one last attempt to rise. It pushed with its hind legs, trying to stand. Scrapper waited until it was halfway up, then struck again. He went for the same throat wound, his teeth finding arteries and tearing through them with practiced efficiency. This time, when Scrapper backed away, the Gorak didn't try to rise again. The creature collapsed onto its side, its breathing shallow and rapid. Blood pooled beneath its massive body. Those yellow eyes, which had struck terror into countless beings across multiple worlds, stared at nothing. The Gorak shuddered once, then went still. The cargo bay fell into absolute silence. Scrapper sat down and began grooming his face with his paws. as if he'd just finished a mildly interesting task rather than killing a creature 12 times his size. David stared, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. He knew honey badgers were tough. He knew they were fearless. But seeing Scrapper take down a Death World apex predator was something else entirely. The two pirates were backing away slowly, their equipment forgotten. They looked at Scrapper with expressions of pure terror. "We should leave," one of them whispered. "Agreed," the other replied. They ran for the exit, abandoning their mission entirely. David didn't try to stop them. Let station security deal with them later. He approached Scrapper carefully. The honey badger looked up at him and David's heart clenched. Now that the fight was over, he could see the damage. Scrapper's fur was matted with blood. There were deep scratches along his side. One of his ears was torn. "Easy, buddy," David said softly, kneeling down. "Let me see." Scrapper allowed David to examine him, though he seemed more interested in finding something to eat than worrying about his injuries. That was typical. Honey badgers had incredibly high pain tolerance. David carefully felt along Scrapper's ribs and legs. Nothing seemed broken, though there would definitely be bruising. The scratches were deep but not life-threatening. The torn ear would need treatment but wasn't serious. "You're going to need a vet," David told him. "A good one." Scrapper sneezed, unimpressed by this diagnosis. Behind the cargo containers, the children began to emerge. They moved slowly, still shocked by what they'd witnessed. The small blue-furred being approached first, looking down at Scrapper with wide eyes. "It saved us," the child said in a small voice. "He saved you," David corrected gently. "His name is Scrapper." The other children gathered around, keeping a respectful distance but clearly fascinated. One of them, a reptilian youth similar to Relac's species, reached out hesitantly. "Can I touch him?" "Better not," David advised. "He's injured and might be cranky." As if to prove this point, Scrapper growled softly and moved closer to David. The children stepped back quickly. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Security had finally arrived. Relac burst into the cargo bay, his weapon raised, ready for combat. He stopped when he saw the scene. The dead Gorok in the center of the bay. The fleeing pirates who ran right past the security team. The safe children. And David kneeling beside a very small, very bloodied honey badger. Relac's weapon lowered slowly. His eyes moved from the Gorok to Scrapper, then back again as if his brain couldn't process the connection. "What happened here?" he demanded. David stood up, scooping Scrapper into his arms. The honey badger allowed it, though he kept watching the security team with suspicious eyes. "Scrapper happened," David said simply. More security officers poured into the bay. They secured the area, checked on the children, and began documenting the scene. Medical personnel arrived to treat the young aliens for shock. Through it all, David held Scrapper, who was finally starting to calm down from the adrenaline of battle. Relac approached them slowly, his expression unreadable. He looked down at Scrapper for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," the security chief said finally. "Both of you." The medical bay of Helios 7 was designed to treat dozens of different species, but the doctor examining Scrapper seemed particularly puzzled by honey badger anatomy. The doctor, a being with 6 tentacles and a gentle manner, kept scanning Scrapper with various instruments and shaking what passed for a head. "The injuries should be much worse," the doctor said to David. "According to my scans, this creature was thrown into walls, crushed under significant weight, and struck by a tail that generates force equivalent to a small vehicle impact." "And yet here he is," David replied, stroking Scrapper's head while the doctor worked. "The skin is remarkable. It's thick, yes, but also incredibly loose. When trauma occurs, the force is distributed rather than concentrated. And the bone density is higher than expected for a creature this size. It's as if this species evolved specifically to survive attacks from much larger predators." "That's exactly what happened," David confirmed. "Earth has a lot of large predators." The doctor applied a healing gel to Scrapper's scratches and bandaged the torn ear. "Keep him quiet for a few days. No fighting Death World monsters." Scrapper, who had been remarkably patient through the examination, immediately jumped off the treatment table and began investigating the medical equipment. "I'll try," David said, though they both knew quiet wasn't really in Scrapper's nature. When David and Scrapper left the medical bay, they found a crowd waiting in the corridor. Dozens of aliens from various species lined the hallway, all watching them with expressions that ranged from awe to respect to fear. As David passed, several aliens bowed their heads. Others simply stared. A few stepped back, giving Scrapper plenty of space. Commander Vorin, the insectoid station administrator, approached them near the main atrium. The commander's compound eyes fixed on Scrapper with new appreciation. "Captain Reed," Vorin said formally, "the station owes you and your companion a debt. Those children would have died if you hadn't intervened." "Scrapper did the heavy lifting," David replied. "Indeed." Vorin's mandibles clicked in what might have been their version of a smile. "The security footage has been reviewed. What your companion accomplished is remarkable. The Gorok was a mature specimen, enhanced with combat modifications. It should have been impossible for any creature Scrapper's size to defeat it. Honey badgers don't really think about what's possible or impossible," David explained. "They just do what needs to be done." Vorin gestured to his datapad. "I've been researching your home world. Earth is not listed as a death world in our databases, but perhaps that classification should be reconsidered." "Earth is complicated," David said. "It's not as harsh as some worlds, but it has a lot of dangerous species. Humans evolved alongside them. And creatures like honey badgers, they're part of why humans learned to be careful. We didn't conquer Earth, we survived it. That taught us respect for the planet and everything living on it." Talara appeared from the crowd, her blue feathers gleaming under the station lights. She approached with a datapad of her own. "Captain Reed, I've been authorized by the Merchant Guild to offer you premium trade contracts. Any species that produces companions like Scrapper is clearly worth establishing strong partnerships with." "Scrapper isn't really typical," David tried to explain. "Most humans don't have honey badgers, but they come from your world," Talara insisted. "That's significant. I've been reading about other Earth species. Crocodiles that can death roll prey 3 times their size. Ants that can lift 50 times their body weight. Octopi that can solve complex puzzles. Elephants with memories spanning decades. Your planet is extraordinary." "We have some interesting animals," David admitted, trying not to smile at the aliens' newfound enthusiasm for Earth wildlife. Raylak approached last. The security chief looked tired, with fresh bandages visible under his armor. He stopped in front of David and, to everyone's surprise, dropped to one knee. "I underestimated you and your companion," Raylak said formally. "In my culture, such misjudgment demands recognition. I request permission to tell the story of Scrapper's battle to my people. Your companion's courage deserves to be remembered." David glanced down at Scrapper, who was currently trying to determine if Raylak's armored knee was edible. "You can tell the story," David agreed, "but tell it accurately. Scrapper didn't fight because he was trained or because he wanted glory. He fought because children were in danger, and that's what honey badgers do. They protect what matters." Raylak stood, his golden eyes meeting David's with newfound respect. "I will tell it exactly so, and I will add that humans who bond with such creatures must be equally worthy of respect." Over the next few hours, David found himself repeatedly telling people about Earth and its animals. He showed them videos he'd stored in his datapad. Honey badgers raiding beehives, fighting off lions, digging burrows with impressive speed. The aliens watched with fascination and growing respect. One young alien, the blue-furred child Scrapper had saved, approached shyly with their parent. "Can I thank him?" the child asked. David nodded, and the child carefully approached Scrapper. The honey badger, full of food from the medical bay and relatively content, allowed the child to gently touch his head. "Thank you for saving me," the child whispered. Scrapper looked up at the child, then went back to grooming his paws. Thanks weren't necessary in his worldview. He'd seen a threat and dealt with it. That was simply what one did. That evening, David prepared to depart Helios 7. His cargo run was complete, and he'd received several lucrative offers for future contracts. The station's view of humanity had shifted dramatically in just one day. As he walked to his ship with Scrapper trotting beside him, David passed the arena where he'd been humiliated just yesterday. The obstacle course was still set up, now looking foolish and irrelevant. Talara intercepted them at the docking bay entrance. "Before you go," she said, "I want to understand something. Humans keep animals as companions, not as weapons or tools. Is that correct?" "Usually, yes," David confirmed. "We form bonds with them. They're family. And yet your companion is clearly capable of extreme violence. David looked down at Scrapper, who was investigating an interesting smell near a cargo crate. Honey badgers are what they are. Fierce, independent, fearless. Humans don't try to change them or train them to be something else. We respect them for what they already are. That's a very different philosophy from most species, Talara observed. Most cultures either dominate animals or engineer them for specific purposes. Earth taught us that everything alive has value in its natural form, David said. Honey badgers don't need to be improved or modified. They're already perfect at being honey badgers. Talara's feathers ruffled thoughtfully. Your species is more interesting than I initially believed. Safe travels, Captain Reed. I suspect the galaxy will be hearing much more about humans and their remarkable world. David boarded his ship with Scrapper. As the docking clamps released and they moved away from Helios 7, David pulled up the communications logs. The story had already spread beyond the station. Across the galactic network, messages were flying between worlds. Videos of the fight captured by security cameras were being shared and analyzed. Scientists were requesting information about Earth's biosphere. Xenobiologists wanted to study honey badgers. The title of one popular newsfeed caught David's attention. Death World Earth, the planet that produced the unkillable badger. He laughed and showed the screen to Scrapper. You're famous now, buddy. Scrapper glanced at the screen, unimpressed, then curled up in his favorite spot near the ship's heating vent. Within minutes, he was snoring softly, content and peaceful. David set course for their next destination, a mining colony 3 systems away. As the stars streaked past the viewport, he reflected on how quickly things had changed. Yesterday, humans were viewed as soft, their world as unremarkable, their companions as useless. Today, the galaxy was reconsidering everything they thought they knew about Earth, all because one small creature had done what came naturally, refusing to back down, protecting the innocent, and surviving against impossible odds. That was the thing about honey badgers, David thought. They didn't try to be impressive. They just were, and maybe David realized that was true of humanity too. Humans didn't need to prove they were the strongest or the smartest. They just needed to be themselves, survivors from a world that had taught them the value of courage, persistence, and standing up when it mattered. The galaxy would learn. One story at a time. Scrapper snored louder, completely unconcerned with galactic politics or changing perceptions. He was just a honey badger, doing honey badger things, and that, it turned out, was more than enough. The sound of children laughing echoed across the courtyard of the Galactic Juvenile Education Facility. Rick Walsh sat on a bench near the fountain, watching a group of young Centauri students play a game that looked like a combination of tag and zero-gravity ballet. He smiled, remembering how strange it had seemed when he first arrived 6 months ago. Now it felt normal. Rick was a staff sergeant in the Human Coalition Forces, though his current assignment barely felt like military duty. He was supposed to be training the local security teams, teaching them Earth combat techniques. Most days, he spent more time telling stories to curious children than drilling soldiers. The kids loved hearing about Earth animals, especially the weird ones. Last week, he had spent an entire afternoon explaining what a platypus was to a group of confused Alarian youngsters. Mr. Rick, a small voice called out. Lyra, a 9-year-old Centauri girl with silver skin and bright purple eyes, ran toward him. She held a data pad in her hands. I found a picture of that animal you told us about yesterday. The honey badger. Rick chuckled and took the pad from her. The screen showed a stocky, black and white creature with small eyes and visible claws. Yep, that's the one. Mean little thing. Fights animals 10 times its size and doesn't back down from anything. Is that why they call you honey badger? Lyra asked innocently. Rick's smile faded just a bit. His call sign was not something he advertised here. It came from a different time, a bloodier time during the border conflicts. Who told you that? He asked gently. I heard some of the security guards talking. They said you were scary when you fought. She looked worried. But you're nice to us. Rick ruffled her hair, careful not to touch the sensitive nerve clusters on her scalp. I'm nice to people who deserve nice. Animals like the honey badger, they're only dangerous when something threatens what they care about. Remember that, okay? Lyra nodded and ran back to her friends. Rick watched her go, then glanced up at the sky. It was clear today, a pale green color thanks to Viridian Iphi's unusual atmosphere. 3 moons hung visible even in daylight. Beautiful. Peaceful. Too peaceful. Rick's instincts had been bothering him for 3 days now. Little things. The supply ship that was supposed to arrive yesterday never showed up. The military communication channels had more chatter than usual. But when he asked about it, everyone said it was just routine exercises. This morning, he had noticed the automated defense turrets on the facility's outer walls were running diagnostic tests, which usually meant someone suspected they might need to use them soon. He had tried to talk to Headmaster Torvak about running emergency drills with the students. The Alarian administrator had shut him down immediately. "We will not frighten the children with unnecessary military exercises, Sergeant Walsh. This is a school, not a military base." Rick had wanted to argue, but Torvak was right in a way. The facility had been safe for 30 years. It housed children from 47 different species, mostly the sons and daughters of diplomats and military officers. Security was good. The location was remote. There was no reason to expect trouble, except Rick's gut said otherwise. A soft alarm chimed from his wrist communicator. Time for the afternoon assembly. Rick stood and stretched, his joints popping. He was pushing 40 now, older than most frontline soldiers, but he kept himself in shape. Had to. You never knew when old skills might be needed again. The courtyard filled with students as classes let out. Teachers guided lines of children toward the central assembly area. Rick spotted Headmaster Torvak on the raised platform adjusting his formal robes. The Alarian took these assemblies seriously, always giving speeches about unity and education and the bright future of the coalition. Rick positioned himself near the back, eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. Security guards stood at the regular posts. Everything looked normal. He started to relax, then the shields failed. It was not dramatic. No explosion, no alarm. The shimmering blue barrier that covered the facility like an invisible dome simply vanished. Rick saw it happen because he was looking up at exactly the right moment, watching a flock of local birds that had been deflected by the shield suddenly fly straight through where it used to be. Every instinct he had screamed danger. "Get down," Rick roared, already moving. 3 seconds later, the sky split open with fire. Assault ships materialized out of stealth mode directly overhead, their hulls painted blood red. Rick recognized the design immediately. Marauder-class gunships favored by mercenary groups. The heavy weapons on their undersides glowed with charging energy. The first bombardment hit the security barracks on the east side of the facility. The building exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. The shockwave knocked dozens of children off their feet. Screaming started instantly, high-pitched and terrified. Rick was already running. His mind shifted gears, combat training taking over after months of dormancy. The armory was 300 meters away. He needed weapons. He needed to get the children to shelter. He needed to do both right now. Another explosion rocked the Western Guard Tower. Rick saw bodies thrown through the air. The automated defenses were not responding. That meant someone had hacked the systems before the attack. This was planned. Professional dark shapes dropped from the assault ships. Mercenaries in powered armor descending on jump jets. They landed hard in the courtyard, weapons already firing. Coalition guards who tried to fight back were cut down in seconds. Rick grabbed 2 small children who were frozen in terror and shoved them behind a decorative planter. "Run to the admin building. Underground shelter, go now." One of the children, a young Threxian boy, just stared at him with huge eyes. Rick forced himself to soften his voice. "I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me? Run fast and don't look back." The boy nodded and grabbed his friend's hand. They ran. Rick moved through the chaos, pulling children out of the open, directing them toward safety. A plasma bolt seared past his head, close enough that he smelled burning air. He dove behind the fountain as more shots chewed into the stone structure. A group of students huddled near the platform, pinned down by mercenary fire. He counted 8 children. Lyra was among them, pressed flat against the ground with tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met across 30 meters of open ground. She called out his name. Rick looked at the mercenaries advancing on their position. He looked at the children. He looked at the burning buildings and the bodies of guards who had not been fast enough. Then he looked at the armory, still intact but in the opposite direction. The choice took half a second. Rick sprinted toward the children, staying low. Plasma fire tracked him, but he was moving too fast, too erratically. He had done this before in worse situations, against worse odds. His body remembered even if his mind had tried to forget. He slid in next to Lyra, using his body to shield her from incoming fire. The other children clustered around him. "Uncle Rick," Lyra sobbed. "I'm scared." Rick checked his surroundings. They were trapped. More mercenaries were landing. The coalition guards were dead or scattered. Help was not coming fast enough. He had no weapons. He had no armor. He had 8 terrified children depending on him. Rick looked down at Lyra and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of something that had been sleeping and was now very much awake. "Stay down, kids," he said quietly. "Uncle Rick's going to work now. The honey badger was loose and honey badgers don't care about odds." Rick moved fast through the smoke and chaos. He kept the children behind him as he navigated toward the maintenance corridors. These passages ran beneath the facility like veins, used by repair crews and rarely traveled by students or teachers. Rick had mapped them during his first week here, old habits from his combat days. "Always know the terrain, always have an escape route, stay close and stay quiet," he whispered to the 8 children following him. They obeyed without question, their fear making them compliant. Good. Fear could be useful if it kept them careful. They reached a service entrance hidden behind decorative panels. Rick pried it open with his bare hands, the metal groaning but giving way. Inside, the corridor was dark and cramped. He ushered the children through and sealed the door behind them. Emergency lighting strips glowed faintly along the floor, casting green shadows. Rick led them deeper into the facility's guts, moving by memory. The shelter was on the other side of the complex, beneath the administration building. It would take 15 minutes to get there through these tunnels. 15 minutes where anything could happen. Behind them, muffled explosions continued. The facility was being torn apart. They reached an intersection. Rick held up his hand, signaling the children to stop. He listened. Footsteps above. Heavy boots. Multiple contacts. He counted at least 6 moving in formation. Professionals. He needed a weapon. Rick gestured for the children to stay put and crept forward alone. The corridor opened into a maintenance bay where ventilation systems connected. Through a ceiling grate, he could see into the hallway above. 4 mercenaries stood there, armored and armed with military-grade plasma rifles. They were executing wounded coalition guards, shooting each one in the head to confirm kills. Rick's jaw tightened. These were not soldiers following rules of engagement. These were killers on a payroll. One mercenary split off from the group, moving down a side passage. Rick waited until the others moved out of sight, then silently climbed the access ladder to the grate. He pushed it up slowly, inch by inch, making no sound. The lone mercenary walked past, oblivious. Rick exploded upward. His hand clamped over the mercenary's mouth while his other arm locked around the neck in a chokehold. The mercenary struggled, trying to bring his weapon around, but Rick was already twisting. There was a muffled crack. The body went limp. Rick lowered the corpse to the ground and stripped it quickly. Plasma rifle, sidearm, combat knife. Armor was too big and would slow him down, but he took the communication earpiece and tactical display visor. The earpiece crackled to life in his ear. "Mercenary chatter, Sector 7 clear. No resistance. Main courtyard secured. We have the landing pads. Command, this is Team 3. We've got approximately 40 hostages in the auditorium, adults and juveniles." Rick filed away every piece of information. 60 combatants total based on the unit designations he was hearing. Their commander was someone called Cross. Their mission was hostage-taking, not slaughter. They wanted leverage that gave him an advantage. They would be cautious about collateral damage. He would not. Rick returned to the children. They stared at the weapons he now carried with wide eyes. Lyra looked like she might cry again. "I'm still the same person," Rick said gently. "These are just tools. Tools I know how to use to keep you safe. Understand?" They nodded. He led them onward. The maintenance tunnels brought them near the administration building without encountering more mercenaries. Rick could see the reinforced shelter doors ahead, sealed but intact. Good. He activated the emergency override code and the heavy doors hissed open. Inside, he found chaos. 50 or 60 people, students and staff, huddled in the dim emergency lighting. Coalition guards stood at the entrance with weapons drawn until they recognized Rick. Sergeant Walsh, Lieutenant Dowell, a Centauri officer with blue skin and sharp features, rushed forward. "Thank the stars. We thought everyone in the courtyard was dead." "Most are," Rick said flatly. He guided his group of children inside, and they were immediately swarmed by relieved teachers. "What's your status?" "We have maybe 20 combat-capable personnel." 15 guards, 5 armed teachers. The rest are civilians and children. The shields are down, communications are jammed, and we have no contact with reinforcements. How long until help arrives? Dal's face darkened. Best case, 4 hours. The nearest coalition fleet is 3 systems away. Rick nodded. That was about what he expected. The mercenaries have 40 more hostages in the auditorium. They're planning to use them as leverage. We should fortify this position and wait for extraction, Dal said. This shelter was built to withstand orbital bombardment. We can hold. For how long? Rick asked. They control the facility. They can cut life support, vent the atmosphere, or just set demolition charges. This shelter becomes a tomb if we wait. What are you suggesting? Rick checked the plasma rifle's charge. Full. Good. I'm going back out there. Dal grabbed his arm. That's suicide. You're 1 man against 60 trained mercenaries. 57, Rick corrected. I already killed 3. He pulled his arm free. I'm not asking permission, Lieutenant. I'm informing you of my intentions. When you hear explosions near the auditorium, that's your signal to push out and secure the landing pads. We need to call for help. You'll never reach the auditorium alive. Rick smiled that cold smile again. You don't know much about honey badgers, do you, Lieutenant? Before Dal could respond, Rick was moving toward the shelter exit. A small voice stopped him. Uncle Rick, wait. Pax, the young Threxian boy he had saved earlier, ran up to him. The child held out a small device. I know the facility better than anyone. All the kids do. We know every vent, every hidden passage. We want to help. Rick knelt down to the boy's level. You already helped by being brave and getting to safety. That's enough. But you're going to fight them alone. That's what I do, kid. Pax's eyes filled with tears, but his voice stayed steady. The honey badger fights big things and doesn't care. You told us that. But even honey badgers need help sometimes. Rick felt something twist in his chest. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. You're right. I do need help. I need you to stay here and protect the others. Keep them calm. Keep them safe. Can you do that for me? Pax nodded, wiping his eyes. I can do that. Good man. Rick stood and walked toward the exit. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the frightened faces watching him. Children who had been laughing and playing just an hour ago. Adults who thought today would be like any other day. Listen to me, Rick said, his voice carrying through the shelter. I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible, but I need you to believe something. I need you to believe that I will get those hostages out. I need you to believe that we will survive this. Because that belief, that hope, is what keeps us human. It's what makes us different. We don't give up. We don't abandon each other. And we sure as hell don't let monsters win. He hefted the plasma rifle. So stay strong. Stay together. And when this is over, we'll all walk out of here. That's a promise. The shelter doors sealed behind him with a solid thunk. Rick was alone in hostile territory, outnumbered and outgunned. He had been in worse situations, not many, but a few. The earpiece crackled with mercenary communications. They were consolidating positions, tightening control. They thought they had won. They thought it was over. Rick started moving through the facility like a ghost, silent, deadly, hunting time, to show them what happened when you made a human. Angry. Time to show them what a honey badger could do when you threatened its family. The children were his family now. All of them. Every single child in this facility, and Rick Walsh protected family no matter the cost. Rick moved through the facility like death-wearing skin. He knew every corner of this place now, every blind spot and choke point. The mercenaries were good, but they were fighting on his ground. He found Team 5 in the eastern dormitory, 4 soldiers searching rooms for hiding children. Rick watched them from a ventilation shaft above. They moved with discipline, covering each other, checking corners. Professional work, too bad for them. Rick waited until they split into pairs, 2 entering rooms on opposite sides of the hall. Then he dropped through a ceiling panel behind the rear pair. The combat knife entered the first mercenary's neck before the man could turn. Rick caught the falling body, used it as a shield as the second mercenary spun around. The plasma bolt meant for Rick's head hit his dead comrade instead. Rick threw the corpse forward, closing distance. The mercenary backpedaled, trying to bring his rifle up. Too slow. Rick was inside his guard, striking with precise brutality. Elbow to throat. Knee to groin. Knife to chest cavity. The mercenary dropped without making a sound loud enough to alert his teammates. The other two emerged from their rooms and Rick was already moving. He fired the plasma rifle he had taken. Double tap center mass on the first target. The mercenary's shields flared and died. The body hit the floor. Rick rolled sideways as return fire chewed into the wall where he had been standing. He came up behind a support pillar and tossed his knife around the corner. It was a bad throw, not meant to kill, just to distract. The last mercenary tracked the movement, firing at the blade. Rick swung out and put 2 rounds through the man's helmet. 4 down. Rick salvaged ammunition and a better rifle, then melted back into the facility's hidden spaces. The mercenary communication channel erupted with status checks for Team 5. When they did not respond, the chatter changed tone. Confusion became concern. Good. Fear was a weapon too. Rick accessed the facility's internal systems through a maintenance terminal. The mercenaries had locked down most functions, but they had missed the environmental controls. Rick triggered the fire suppression systems in the western wing. Foam and chemical retardant flooded 3 corridors, killing visibility and forcing mercenary teams to relocate. While they stumbled through the foam, Rick hit them from unexpected angles. A plasma grenade rolled down a stairwell. Precisely aimed shots from long distance through windows. He was everywhere and nowhere, striking and vanishing before they could respond. The enemy commander's voice came through the earpiece, tight with anger. All teams switch to thermal imaging. The human is using the environment against us. Teams 6 and 7 converge on the western wing. Find him and kill him, Rick smiled. They were bunching up, abandoning defensive positions to hunt him. Perfect. He led them on a chase through the maintenance areas, leaving just enough traces to keep them following. Footprints in the foam. A door left slightly ajar. The occasional glimpse of movement. Basic stuff, but effective against soldiers focused on closing with an enemy. When 12 mercenaries were grouped in a junction corridor, Rick detonated the plasma battery pack he had rigged to the power conduits above them. The explosion was not huge, but it did not need to be. The conduits ruptured, spraying superheated coolant and electrical discharge. The mercenaries' shields overloaded. Men screamed. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Rick did not stay to watch. He was already moving to his next position. The mercenary channel dissolved into chaos. Orders being shouted. Teams calling for medical assistance. Someone yelling about falling back. The commander's voice cut through it all. All units consolidate at rally points. Stop chasing him. He's baiting us into traps. Defensive positions now. Rick had bought time, but he had not freed the hostages. He needed to reach the auditorium. According to the communications he was monitoring, Commander Cross had moved the captured civilians there, using them as human shields. He made his way through the facility's upper levels, avoiding the main corridors where mercenaries had regrouped. Through a classroom window, he spotted the auditorium across the central courtyard. 20 soldiers surrounded it in defensive positions. Getting in would be nearly impossible. He needed a new approach. Rick found what he was looking for in the theater's technical booth. The facility's old communication array, shut down by the jamming but still physically intact. If he could boost the signal strength and punch through a burst transmission, he might be able to call for help. But he did not know how. This was not his specialty. Movement behind him. Rick spun, raising his weapon. Pac stood there with 3 other children. They had followed him somehow, using the passages only they knew. "What are you doing here?" Rick demanded, keeping his voice low. "I told you to stay in the shelter." "We can help," Pac said. "We know how to fix things. The teachers let us help the engineers sometimes. We can make the communication thing work." Rick wanted to send them back, but looking at their determined faces, he realized something. These children had already seen the worst. Hiding them away would not erase that, and they were offering help he desperately needed. "Okay," he said, "but you do exactly what I say when I say it." "Understood?" They nodded. While Rick kept watch, the children worked on the array with surprising skill. Pax explained what they were doing in simple terms, rerouting power and adjusting frequencies. Within 10 minutes, they had a working transmitter. "It will only work for a few seconds before the jamming blocks it again," Pax said. "What do we send?" Rick took the transmitter. He thought about complicated distress codes and tactical briefings. Then he thought about what would actually get a response from people who knew him. He set the message to repeat on emergency frequencies and hit transmit. "Academy under attack." Honey Badger needs help. Coordinates follow. The transmission burst out into space, a single shout into the dark. Then the jamming crashed back down and the array went dead. Did it work? One of the children asked. We'll find out, Rick said. Now we get you back to the shelter. He led them back through the safe routes, moving slowly and carefully. They encountered no resistance. When they reached the shelter, Lieutenant Dal was organizing a defense with the guards. Sergeant, we heard explosions. What's the situation? I've reduced their numbers and disrupted their control, Rick reported. But they still have 40 hostages in the auditorium. That's our next objective. That's suicide. They have that position locked down. Then I'll have to get creative. Rick checked his weapons. He was running low on ammunition. I need explosives, whatever you have. Dal hesitated, then nodded to one of his guards. The man brought out a small case of breaching charges used for emergency door removal. Rick took them and started rigging a harness. The children watched him work. Uncle Rick, Lyra said quietly, are you going to die? He paused, looking at her honest, scared face. He could lie, but she deserved better. Maybe, he said. But that won't stop me from trying. Because here's the thing about honey badgers, Lyra. They don't fight because they think they'll win. They fight because something needs protecting. And as long as I can still move, as long as I can still pull a trigger, those people in the auditorium have a chance. He stood up, fully armed now. Lieutenant Dal, give me 20 minutes. Then push for the landing pads with everyone who can fight. We need to signal for help. 20 minutes won't be enough. Rick headed for the exit. Then I'll just have to work faster. The doors sealed behind him for the second time. Somewhere in the facility, 40 people waited for rescue or death. Rick intended to give them the first option, even if it cost him everything. Rick observed the auditorium from his position in the ceiling crawlspace. Below him, 40 hostages sat in the center of the large room, surrounded by armed mercenaries. He counted 18 guards positioned around the perimeter. Commander Cross stood near the stage, a tall figure in crimson armor, speaking into a communication device. The hostages looked terrified. Teachers held young children close. Older students tried to stay calm, but their fear was obvious. Headmaster Torvak sat among them, his usual confident posture replaced by something broken and defeated. Rick had 18 minutes left before Lieutenant Dal's push to the landing pads. He needed to create enough chaos to split the mercenary forces. Time to work. He moved through the crawl space above the auditorium, planting breaching charges at key structural points. He was not trying to bring down the building, just create openings. The technical booth overlooked the main floor from a high angle. Perfect position. Rick descended into the booth quietly. The equipment here controlled lighting, sound, and environmental systems for the auditorium. He began preparing his surprise, setting timers and routing commands. Below, Commander Cross addressed the hostages. Your coalition is being contacted now. They will have simple terms. Withdraw all forces from the outer reach territories or you die. Your governments value territory less than they value your lives, so you should hope they choose wisely. A young Alarian teacher spoke up, voice shaking. Why are you doing this? These are children. Cross turned to her slowly. Because children make excellent leverage. Adults will do anything to protect their offspring. It is weakness we exploit. Rick's finger hovered over the activation switch. He wanted to kill this man so badly his hand shook. But timing mattered. He needed maximum confusion. He triggered the first charge. The explosion blew out a section of wall near the stage. Alarms immediately began wailing throughout the facility. Rick activated every sound and light system in the auditorium at once. Speakers roared with feedback. Emergency strobes flashed in random patterns. Fire suppression foam began spraying from ceiling nozzles. The mercenaries reacted instantly, training taking over. They moved to defensive positions, but their formations were broken by the chaos. Hostages scattered in panic, some running for the exits, others freezing in place. Rick dropped through a ceiling panel into the technical booth's upper platform. He began firing controlled shots into the mercenary positions below. 3 went down in the first seconds before the others located him. Return fire chewed into the booth's protective barriers. On the main floor, Headmaster Torvak saw what was happening. Saw Rick fighting alone against impossible odds. Something in the old administrator's face changed. He grabbed the young teacher next to him. Get the children to the exits, he shouted over the noise. When they're confused, we move. The teacher stared at him. We'll be killed, maybe, but that human is dying to save us. I won't let his sacrifice be wasted. Torvak stood up despite the plasma fire filling the air. Everyone move now! Exit doors, go! Some hostages ran. Others hesitated. Rick provided covering fire, forcing the mercenaries to take cover instead of shooting fleeing civilians. But there were too many angles, too many guns. A plasma bolt caught a running Centauri man in the back. He fell. A child screamed. Rick changed tactics. He threw a plasma grenade toward the largest group of mercenaries. They scattered. In that moment, Rick jumped from the booth platform, using a deployed banner as an improvised rope to swing down to the main floor. He landed hard, rolled, came up firing. The closest mercenary went down. Rick grabbed his fallen body and used it as a shield while advancing. Plasma fire from multiple directions hit the corpse. Rick fired around it, targeting weapons and exposed limbs, disabling rather than killing when possible to create obstacles and confusion. A mercenary charged him with a combat blade. Rick sidestepped, let the man's momentum carry him past, then shot him in the back. He spun and fired at a mercenary trying to line up a shot on fleeing hostages. The shot went wide but made the mercenary duck. Half the hostages were out now, running through the exits. Rick moved to a position between them and the mercenaries, drawing fire deliberately. Plasma bolts scorched past him. One grazed his arm, burning through sleeve and skin. He ignored the pain. Commander Cross appeared from behind cover, his personal shields shimmering. You must be the one they call Honey Badger. I heard you were dead. Not yet, Rick said, firing. His shot splashed harmlessly off Cross's military-grade shields. You cannot win this. Look around. My men still outnumber you. The hostages you saved will be recaptured. Your heroics change nothing. Rick smiled, blood running down his burned arm. You're wrong. I already won. How? Because those kids are running. Because that old administrator found his courage. Because humans don't measure victory by whether we survive. We measure it by whether we protected what mattered. Cross raised his weapon. Then die with your pride. The auditorium doors burst open. Lieutenant Dal and 20 armed defenders poured in, firing as they came. The mercenaries, caught between Rick's position and the new threat, broke formation. Some tried to return fire. Others attempted to flee. Rick used the confusion to close distance with Cross. He tackled the commander, both of them crashing to the floor. Cross was stronger, his armor giving him advantage. They struggled for control. Above them, the ceiling groaned. Rick's charges had done more damage than he intended. Structural supports were failing. Dal's voice rang out. Everyone out. Buildings coming down! The defenders grabbed hostages and ran. Rick and Cross continued fighting among the chaos. The commander's fist caught Rick's jaw, snapping his head back. Rick responded with an elbow strike that cracked Cross's helmet visor. You're insane, Cross gasped. We're both going to die. Good, Rick said and punched him again. Hands grabbed Rick from behind. Lieutenant Dal and 2 guards were dragging him toward the exit. Let go, Rick shouted. He's their commander. And you're no good to anyone dead, Dal snapped. Move. They ran for the exit as the ceiling began collapsing. Cross scrambled to his feet and ran the opposite direction, heading for a side emergency exit. Dust and debris filled the air. The main chandelier fell, crushing 2 mercenaries who were too slow. Rick's group burst out into the courtyard just as a section of the auditorium roof caved in. They kept running, putting distance between themselves and the collapsing structure. Behind them, explosions echoed as power systems overloaded. When they finally stopped, Rick counted heads. All the hostages were out, some wounded but alive. The defenders had taken casualties, but most survived. Lieutenant Dal looked at the burning auditorium, then at Rick. That was the most reckless, stupid, insane thing I have ever witnessed. Rick wiped blood from his mouth. Did it work? The hostages are free. The mercenaries are scattered. I'd say yes, it worked, a young voice called out. Uncle Rick! Lyra's older sister ran toward them from the group of freed hostages. She threw her arms around Rick, sobbing. Thank you. Thank you for saving us. Rick awkwardly patted her back, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Just doing my job. No, Headmaster Torvak approached, his robes torn and dirty. You did far more than your job. You gave us hope when we had none. You showed us what courage looks like. The old Ilarian met Rick's eyes. I was wrong about you. Wrong to dismiss your concerns. Wrong to think peace meant we could forget how to fight. You tried to prepare us and I refused to listen. Rick shook his head. Doesn't matter now. We're not done yet. Cross is still out there with at least 20 mercenaries. We need to secure the landing pads and call for real help." As if summoned by his words, a low rumble filled the air. Everyone looked up. The sky split open with light. Coalition fighters screamed through the atmosphere, weapons hot and targeting systems locked. Behind them, the massive shape of a battlecruiser dropped out of faster-than-light travel, its hull bearing the name Vigilant. Rick's emergency transmission had gotten through. Help had arrived. The Coalition fighters hit the mercenary ships like hammers of light. Plasma cannons tore into the Marauder-class vessels still hovering above the facility. One exploded immediately, its reactor breaching in a brilliant flash. The other two tried to run, activating their stealth systems and boosting for orbit. They did not make it. Missiles from the Vigilant tracked them through every evasion attempt. The second ship died in a cascade of secondary explosions. The third managed to return fire, its desperate shots splashing against the battlecruiser's shields, before a fighter wing surrounded it and pounded it into debris. The sky cleared of threats in under 3 minutes. On the ground, the remaining mercenaries saw their escape routes vanish. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Others, either braver or more foolish, tried to fight. Coalition Marines dropped from assault shuttles, heavily armed and ready for combat. The brief firefights that erupted were one-sided. Rick watched it happen from the courtyard, leaning against a broken fountain. His body was starting to register all the damage he had taken. Burns, cuts, bruises, probably some cracked ribs. His right arm was barely functional. But he stayed on his feet because sitting down felt too much like giving up. Lieutenant Dahl coordinated with the arriving Marines, directing them to pockets of remaining resistance. The freed hostages were being evacuated to the shuttles for medical treatment. Children cried, some in relief, others still terrified. Teachers did their best to comfort them. A shuttle landed near Rick's position. The ramp dropped and a familiar figure strode out. Commander Yates, human, 50s, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. He wore full combat armor and carried himself like someone who had been fighting wars since before Rick was born. Because he had. "Rick Walsh," Yates said, looking him over. "You look like hell. Feel worse," Rick admitted. "Good to see you, Commander. Got your message. Honey Badger needs help. That's a first. You've never asked for help before." Yates glanced around at the destroyed facility, the bodies, the frightened children being led to safety. "Looks like you did pretty well on your own, though." "Had help. The lieutenant here and his people. The kids, too. Brave little things." Yates nodded slowly. "How many mercenaries?" "Started with 60. I dropped maybe 15. The rest scattered or surrendered when you showed up." 15, Yates let that sink in. "You killed 15 trained mercenaries while protecting hostages and coordinating a defense. With no backup and no plan." Rick shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled something painful in his shoulder. "Had a plan. It was just a bad plan. But bad plans are better than no plans." A medic approached, but Rick waved him off. "I'm fine. Check the kids first." "Sir, you're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." Yates dismissed the medic with a gesture. When they were alone, the older man's expression softened slightly. "You know you could have died here, right? Against those odds, you should have died." "Yeah, I know. So why? Why not get yourself to safety and wait for us?" Rick looked across the courtyard to where Lyra sat with her sister, both of them wrapped in emergency blankets. The little girl saw him looking and waved. He waved back with his good arm. "Because she called my name," Rick said quietly. "Because I couldn't leave them. Because someone had to stand between these kids and the monsters. And I was here, so it had to be me." Yates followed his gaze. "The human condition. We can't help ourselves. We see someone in trouble and we have to help even when it's stupid." "Especially when it's stupid," Rick agreed. A commotion drew their attention. Marines were escorting a group of captured mercenaries through the courtyard. Among them, limping and covered in dust, was Commander Cross. His expensive armor was dented and his helmet was missing. He saw Rick and stopped walking, staring. "You," Cross said. "You should be dead." "The building collapsed. I got out. But how? How did one man do all this?" Cross looked genuinely confused. "We outnumbered you, outgunned you, had every advantage. How did we lose?" Rick pushed himself off the fountain, standing straight despite the pain. "Because you thought this was a military operation. Calculated risks and acceptable losses. But for me, this was personal. Every child in this facility became my responsibility the moment you attacked. And humans don't do well with math when someone threatens our kids. We don't care about odds. We care about protecting what matters. Cross shook his head. Your species is insane. Probably, Rick agreed. But we're your insane species. We're the ones who show up when everyone else says it's impossible. We're the ones who stand and fight when logic says to run. And we're the ones who will tear through an army to save a single child. Remember that. Make sure whoever hired you remembers it too. The Marines led Cross away. Yates chuckled. Making speeches now? You really did hit your head. Maybe. Rick finally allowed himself to sit down on the fountain's edge. How bad is it? The casualties? Yates's expression grew serious. 47 coalition personnel dead. 12 students. 19 injured critically. It's bad, Rick, but it would have been worse. If you hadn't acted, if you hadn't bought time, we would have arrived to find hundreds dead and the survivors held hostage. Rick closed his eyes. 12 students. 12 children who had been laughing and playing just hours ago. He could see their faces in his mind, knew their names, felt their weight settle on his shoulders alongside all the other ghosts he carried. Hey. Yates's hand gripped his shoulder. You saved hundreds more. That matters. Doesn't feel like it. It never does. But those kids over there, they're alive because of you. Their families get to hold them again. That has to count for something. Rick opened his eyes and looked around the courtyard again. Saw the survivors. Saw the relief and grief mixing on their faces. Saw Pax and his friends being reunited with their parents who had just arrived on the shuttles. Saw Lyra running toward him, breaking free from her sister. She crashed into him and hugged him tight, careful of his injuries. You did it, Uncle Rick, you saved us. Rick hugged her back with his good arm, feeling something tight in his chest. We saved each other, kid. You and Pax and all the brave people here. Everyone who didn't give up. That's why we're still standing. Headmaster Torvak approached slowly. The old Ilarian looked like he had aged years in a single day. Sergeant Walsh, I owe you an apology. Several apologies. And my life, along with the lives of everyone here. You fought when it counted, Rick said. That's what mattered. I should have listened to you. Should have prepared. Should have run those drills you requested. Torvak's voice broke slightly. 12 students died because I was too proud, too certain we were safe. No, Rick said firmly. They died because mercenaries attacked a school. Because someone evil made an evil choice. You're not responsible for what they did. None of us are. Torvak wiped his eyes. How do you carry it? The weight of those we couldn't save? Rick looked at Lyra still holding on to him. At the other children being loaded onto evacuation shuttles. At the survivors helping each other through the wreckage. By remembering the ones we did save, he said. By making sure their survival means something. By being better tomorrow than we were today. Medical personnel finally convinced Rick to let them treat his injuries. They loaded him onto a stretcher despite his protests. As they carried him toward a medical shuttle, children lined the path. Some waved. Some called his name. Some just watched with wide, grateful eyes. Pax ran up and pressed something into Rick's hand. The honey badger figurine the children had been carving in art class now finished. For you, the boy said. So you remember us? Rick's throat felt tight. I could never forget you, Pax. Any of you. The medical shuttle lifted off, carrying Rick toward the Vigilance medical bay. Through the window, he watched the facility grow smaller below. The destruction was obvious from the air. Collapsed buildings, scorch marks. The evidence of violence, but also evidence of survival. People moving through the wreckage, helping each other, refusing to be broken. That was humanity's real strength, Rick thought, as exhaustion finally claimed him. Not that they were strong or fast or clever, but that they refused to give up. That they cared so deeply for others that they would fight impossible battles and endure terrible costs. That when a child cried out in fear, a human answered, and nothing in the universe could stop them from trying to help. Nothing at all. 3 months passed before Rick was cleared for duty again. The doctors on the Vigilant had patched him up, but the injuries went deeper than burns and broken bones. He spent 2 weeks in the medical bay, another month in rehabilitation, and several sessions with a counselor who specialized in combat trauma. Rick hated every minute of it, but he went through the motions. The counselor was a patient Ilarian woman named Vera, who let him sit in silence for most of their sessions. Eventually he started talking. About the children who died. About the ones who survived. About the weight of choosing who to save first when everyone needed saving. You did everything possible, Vera said during their last session. You know that, right? Knowing it and feeling it are different things, Rick replied. They are. But feeling guilty for not being able to save everyone just means you care. And the galaxy needs people who care, Sergeant Walsh. Especially now. Rick was stationed on Frontier Base 7 when he received the message. It was a video file, marked as coming from the Galactic Juvenile Education Facility. He almost deleted it, not ready to face those memories. But something made him open it. The screen showed the facility's courtyard, rebuilt and clean. Students walked between classes. Teachers supervised. Everything looked normal again, peaceful. Then the camera panned to show a memorial garden that had not existed before. Stone pathways wound between flowering plants from dozens of worlds. At the center stood a statue carved from white marble. It showed a human figure, battle-worn and determined, with children of various species gathered around him in protective embrace. The plaque at its base read, "The Honey Badger. When Earth sends its best, they send their heart, in memory of those lost, in honor of those who stood." The video continued. Headmaster Torvak appeared on screen, looking older but steadier than Rick remembered. "Sergeant Walsh, if you are watching this, I wanted you to see what we built. The memorial honors everyone who fell defending this facility. But the statue is you specifically because you embodied something we needed to remember. That courage is not about being unafraid. It is about acting despite fear. That strength is not about overpowering others. It is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." The camera shifted to show Lyra, now several months older and smiling. "Hi, Uncle Rick, I hope you're doing okay. We miss you. I wanted to tell you something. After everything happened, I was really scared. Scared to go back to class. Scared to be alone. But then I remembered what you said about honey badgers. They don't care about being scared. They just do what needs doing. So I tried to be brave like you, and it got easier. Thank you for teaching us that." More children appeared in the video, each sharing a brief message. Pax talked about how he wanted to join the coalition forces when he grew up, to help protect others like Rick had protected them. Others shared artwork they had made, stories they had written, ways they had found courage in dark moments by remembering the human who had fought for them. The video ended with Commander Yates appearing on screen. "Rick, stop being stubborn and check your messages. You've received commendations from 7 different governments. The coalition is offering you any posting you want. The facility wants you to come back as head of security with triple your old pay, and about 100 families want to thank you personally. You're famous now. Deal with it." Rick sat in his small quarters on the base, staring at the blank screen. Famous. He did not want to be famous. He wanted to be left alone to do his job. His communicator chimed. "Incoming call." He almost ignored it, but the caller ID made him pause. Lieutenant Dal. Rick answered. Dal's blue face appeared, looking pleased. "Sergeant Walsh, good to see you up and around. Lieutenant, what can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm calling with an offer. The facility is reopening next month. They want a complete security overhaul. New protocols, new training, new everything. They asked me to head the project. I accepted on one condition, that you join my team." Rick hesitated. "I don't know if I can go back there." "I understand. But consider this. Those children remember you. They need to see that heroes don't just disappear after the battle. They keep going, keep working, keep caring. Your presence there would mean more than any security system we could install. I'm not a hero, Dal. I'm just a soldier who got lucky." "You're wrong. You're exactly what a hero looks like. Imperfect, stubborn, willing to sacrifice everything for others. That's the definition." Dal leaned closer to the camera. "The children need to see that you survived. That doing the right thing doesn't always mean dying for it. Sometimes it means living with it and choosing to keep helping people." Rick thought about the statue in the memorial garden, about Lyra's message, about all the children who were finding courage by remembering what one determined human had done. "I'll think about it," Rick said finally. "That's all I ask. Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready." The call ended. Rick sat alone with his thoughts. Outside his window, Frontier Base 7 bustled with activity. Ships coming and going, soldiers training, people living their lives unaware that somewhere out there, a single act of desperate courage had become a story told across worlds. Rick opened his footlocker and pulled out the honey badger figurine Pax had given him. The carving was rough, childish, but made with care. He set it on his desk where he could see it. Maybe Dal was right. Maybe going back was the right choice. Not to be celebrated or honored, but to show those children that you could face horror and come out the other side, that scars heal, that life continues, that protecting others is a responsibility that does not end when the battle does. His communicator chimed again. This time it was a text message from an unknown number. Rick opened it. "Uncle Rick, this is Pax. Lieutenant Dal gave me your contact info. I hope that's okay. I wanted you to know something. I'm starting a club at the facility. It's called the Honey Badger Corps. We help younger students when they're scared. We stand up to bullies. We do volunteer work in the community. We try to be brave like you were. Like you are. 30 kids joined in the first week. We wear patches with a honey badger on them. Is that okay?" Rick stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed a reply. "It's more than okay, Pax. It's perfect. Keep being brave. Keep helping others. That's what matters most. I'm proud of you." He sent the message, then stood and walked to his window, looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, children were learning that courage was not about being fearless. It was about choosing to act despite fear. That strength was not about domination. It was about protection. That humans, for all their flaws and weaknesses, had something special. They cared. They refused to give up. They stood between the innocent and the dark, and when a child cried out, they answered. Rick made his decision. He would go back to the facility, not as a hero seeking glory, but as a teacher showing students what it meant to keep going after tragedy, to turn pain into purpose, to transform fear into determination, because that was the real legacy of the honey badger. Not the violence or the desperate battle, but the choice to keep caring, keep protecting, keep standing up for those who needed someone in their corner. He opened his communicator and sent a message to Lieutenant Dal. "I accept your offer. When do we start?" The response came back immediately. "Welcome back, Sergeant. We start by rebuilding, together." Rick smiled slightly. Rebuilding, that felt right. Take something broken and make it whole again. Take frightened children and help them find strength. Take a tragedy and transform it into a lesson about resilience. That was the human way. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced, but the ones who refused to quit. The ones who cared so deeply that they would fight impossible battles and carry impossible burdens. The ones who, when darkness came, chose to be the light. Rick packed his gear that night. Tomorrow he would ship out to Viridian IV, back to the facility where he had nearly died, back to the children who remembered him, back to the work of protecting and teaching and showing others that courage was not about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. As he prepared to sleep, Rick looked one more time at the honey badger figurine on his desk. Such a small thing, such a simple gift, but it represented something larger. Hope, resilience, the refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. He thought about all the children across the galaxy who would hear the story of the Academy attack, who would learn about the human who stood alone against an army because it was the right thing to do, who would find their own courage in his example. That was the real victory. Not surviving the battle, but inspiring others to be brave in their own battles, whatever form those took, to stand up when it was easier to stay down, to protect when it was safer to hide, to care when it was simpler not to. Rick closed his eyes and for the first time in 3 months slept without nightmares, because he had made his choice. He would keep going, keep helping, keep standing between children in danger for as long as he was able. That was enough. That was everything. The honey badger was going home, and somewhere in the dark between stars the story spread, whispered in coalition briefing rooms and mercenary hideouts and civilian gatherings. The story of one human who had shattered enemy lines with nothing but determination and an absolute refusal to let children die on his watch. The story of what happens when you threaten something a human has decided to protect. The story of the honey badger who didn't care about odds, only about doing what was right. And the galaxy listened and learned and remembered, because some stories, some acts of courage echo forever. This was one of them.